Hello and welcome to In Conversation. My guest today is cultural sociologist, theorist, and methodologist, Dr. Monique Charles. Monique, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me so much, James. Good to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. And like me, you're a fellow Brit abroad. Where are you calling in from?
I'm currently in Orange County, California, just outside LA.
And where are you from originally, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, I'm a London girl, Northwest London.
So I thought I might have heard a little bit of a lilt there. So no, fair enough. Fair enough. How long have you been in Orange County?
I've been here for almost 2 years now, so nearly 2 years.
Okay, cool. Well, and the funny thing is I'm over here almost on the West Coast. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. So, yeah, exactly. Right. By American standards, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a mere 9-hour drive. So yeah, basically neighbors, right? Okay, well, that's cool. Well, look, I want to jump right in and I want to ask a few questions about your contributions to Intellect's recent publication, Tribal and the Cultural Legacy of Streetwear, which is a really awesome book and one that I'm particularly excited to be involved with. If anyone wants to find out more about the book, we also just did an interview with the editor and with the founder of the brand itself. So that podcast is out there. So do check that out too. But for anyone who doesn't know, Tribal is basically a streetwear brand or a streetwear lifestyle brand that seeks to represent a variety of Southern California cultures. Now, I'm familiar with some of these myself, like, obviously graffiti culture, a lot around hip hop, street art, tattooing, and a lot of things that are connected with Chicano culture. But I wasn't so familiar with Tribal's connections with surf and skate and some of those other Southern California traditions. So this book's really kind of broadened my horizons on that. But yeah, the brand was founded in San Diego, California, and it has the strong Chicano roots, and its aesthetic spans the globe now. And I know they've got lots of retail stores all over the world. So the brand's really kind of taken off and has a real rich cultural legacy, and but definitely is very much connected with its roots. And I think that's really important to Bobby, the founder, and to those people who are involved, from the artists through to the marketing team and all these other people who work with the brand. So I think authenticity is really important, which of course is something that's really important in hip hop culture too. So anyway, the book is in 3 parts. First bit, there's lots of interviews and essays, but then there's also a lot of peer-reviewed scholarly content, and I think that's where your work comes in, really, isn't it, as well? So I definitely want to talk about your specific contribution. But before we jump into that, and you tell us a bit more about your chapter, I was just wondering, like, if you growing up in the UK, were you aware of Tribal as a brand? Because I remember it like through magazines and peripheral, but I wasn't so familiar with it until I actually grew up and came to the US. But were you aware of it when you were growing up in London?
Not so much. A bit like you. It's kind of like peripheral. You might get the magazines if you're able to get maybe the source, or you can get some of those from specialist shops and things like that. You might see little bits and pieces, but other than that, you didn't really hear much about it. And I think that could be partly because of the demographics of the UK compared to the demographics in Southern California at that time as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I remember encountering Chicano culture through hip hop, from West Coast hip hop. But in terms of brands and things, especially streetwear brands, I think the ones that I encountered more were more Averex and Stussy, and maybe things that are more affiliated with the East Coast and East Coast sort of hip hop, or East Coast kind of street culture or streetwear culture. So yeah, I know what you mean. And just this notion of Chicano as well, that as a term, I didn't know until I was much older. So I know that that's obviously a prominent part of your contribution. So for anyone who's not that initiated, can you tell us a little bit more about Chicano culture and how you kind of define it, or how it kind of is used in your article?
Okay, so first off, I'm not Chicano, so it's pretty obvious, but I just want to state that. And like you, I kind of encountered or became aware of Chicano culture much later, as I was starting to come and live in Southern California. So my understanding is, I suppose, in some respects, more of a textbook one rather than a lived one. I'm very, very careful about, I'm not trying to appropriate or claim authenticity in areas that are not in my lane in that respect. But so it's a Southern Californian, Mexican infused culture. It has roots in Mexico or in the Mexican ethnicity, nationality, ancestry. And it's as a result of the Mexicans that, well, I can't even say migrated north, because we know the border when it comes to to California. A while ago it was Mexico, and then after a while it wasn't. But when people migrated north and were starting to work in what has now become Southern California, cultural traditions were brought along, along with the people, as well as new cultures being kind of formed in communities. I suppose they are called barrios. And the culture kind of is from the kind of emerged from those spaces. So that's my understanding of it in the most simplistic terms. I'm open to being corrected. Like I said, I am not from the Chicano community. But yeah, so that's it. Southern, the Mexican American community, particularly, in the southern along the border in that respect.
There's definitely sorry to interrupt you. There's definitely a rich vein of that culture here in Tucson as well, which is like, that's really cool to kind of like move here about a year ago. At the time we were working on the book, and I started to see lots of the visual iconography and symbols and cultural kind of attachments that were being, I was reading the drafts of the book, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'm seeing this much more, and it really kind of opened my perspective. And I'm sure there's quite a lot of subtle differences between the Chicano culture in, Arizona versus, kind of Southern California as well. But nevertheless, there's a lot of intersections between these states around this kind of culture. But let's talk a bit more specifically about your chapter. First of all, what's the title of the chapter?
Oh, A Tribe Lord West.
Yeah, I love it.
I like to play on words. A lot of my academic or my writing titles, I like to play on words. So yes, so tribal, tribe, Lord as in all hail, West Coast, and it kind of sounds a bit like Tribe Called Quest, and not too kind of hip hop as well. So it's like, why not just kind of play around and see what we can come up with.
I like that a lot. And then the subtitle, Hip Hop and Its Influence on Tribal Gear and a New Chicano Generation. So yeah, really cool chapter, and a really interesting title. And I think obviously you're talking about hip hop influence, and I love the little play on words there. With anyone who doesn't know, A Tribe Called Quest are of course from the East Coast, and a really amazing and canonical hip hop crew, from New York. So definitely check out A Tribe Called Quest, and that'll put a bit more on this chapter for you as well. But just tell us a bit about the chapter in general. Like, what's the premise behind it, and what's your main kind of thesis?
Okay, so my main thesis is, well, it's a combination of things. It's okay, we're talking about tribal, we're talking about streetwear, but I'm looking at the ways in which almost the environment or the kind of lived experience, the locality has a central role in the creation of the clothing, of what is on the clothing, and the importance ascribed to the clothing. So one thing, I'm from London, I'm a London girl, so I can get on the bus or the subway, we call it the tube, easily, can get around so easily. But when we get to Southern California, you need a car. You need a car, or you need a Lyft, or you need an Uber, or you need a good friend that will take you wherever you need to go. And so there's something very much about the inability or the need for a car to kind of move around, to move through space. And then we also have the American, I suppose, historical thing about placing particular groups of people in particular areas. So if we're thinking about more, Chicano, they will be in the barrios. If it's more African American, they would be in what would be termed like the ghettos, for lack of a better term. So people are very it was very stratified. So the combination of these two things, like the stratification of people and the inability to kind of move around freely, means that visibility is so important. Visibility and the possessions that you have and the being seen moving through space is very important. And so the low riding car, the graffiti, the graffiti claiming your space, making yourself or your persona visible in your space, or on your body. And some of the markings on the body have connections to ancestral connections, Mexican adornments, the way that people adorn their bodies. So these kinds of things, as well as like the Catholicism that kind of comes up in some of the imagery and things like that. So I was basically looking at the ways in which the importance of moving through space and being seen boldly, and being recognized. It gives a sense of respect, a sense of articulating who you are, and finding ways to do that in your own way, and the ways in which tribal have managed to kind of encapsulate this. So like you, I didn't really know that much about the surfing side of things or the skating side of things so much. The low riding, yes, the tattoos, the importance of the lines when it comes to the lips and the eyes for the ladies, the big jewelry, I like big jewelry, right? So all of that sort of stuff, the being seen. But tribal, when it comes to hip-hop comes over to the West Coast and is being kind of absorbed into or interwoven into Chicano culture. It kind of also becomes a vehicle for Chicano youth to begin to articulate their realities and their experiences. It becomes a kind of flexible tool, if you want to call it that is being used in that way. And so I'm talking about the ways in which tribal capture the importance of the visual, being seen, being noticed, moving through space, capturing a kind of the music scenes, and I suppose they even kind of got elements of like grunge and punk kind of brought into that as well. But it's just the way they will visually represent some of the graffiti or the kind of iconographies on the shirts, on the clothes, the lowriders on the shirts, on the clothes. But then they also have car shows. They also have ways in which it's clothing, it's a lifestyle, and they've managed to encapsulate all of that, the music, just all the iconography, all the kind of the visual stuff, to kind of articulate the culture in a brand, and in a way that's authentic, that when it goes to places further afield, like I know that they got a store in Germany, they got a store in Japan, for example, people, it really resonates. And then there's something about that authenticity that other people from outside begin to grasp onto, and it's an aesthetic that they can kind of resonate with as well. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in there.
That's yeah. I mean, you've said a bunch of fascinating stuff there, and I think Bobby would appreciate that, that notion of authenticity, because I know it's really important for the brand to be available in Germany and these other places and to represent that culture globally. And I remember telling him about like Chicano culture and lowriding culture in Birmingham, England now, and things like that. So this is really, I know it's big in Japan. It's very much kind of internationalized, but again, a bit like hip hop. And when hip hop went truly global, there's you can be, from a white rural community in southern England, and as long as you try to represent yourself authentically and don't try and pretend to be something you aren't, and don't try and steal someone else's narrative and appropriate someone else's culture, then you're fully hip hop. You can be hip hop, and you could, just as long as you're, those tenets. And again, it goes into what you're saying about like reappropriating public space, and taking parts of your own culture and showcasing that and being proud and assertive about that, because you've been disenfranchised from mainstream culture or whatever it might be. So this brand is really cool in the sense that it really connects very much with what hip hop is. But then also, again, jumping all over the place, I know it had a huge moment because of nu metal, which is again a really interesting melting pot, whether you love or hate the genre, because it was a melting of different cultures for sure, but you have very much a hip hop and metal music coming together, and it being very kind of like stylistic and very much about like a look and a culture, and very much like a collective. And I think this brand's really connected in that too. But I'm really glad that you had a contribution that was more specific to hip hop, and sort of like discussed that kind of like almost that new frontier, where hip hop was founded in New York, and then it's moved from the east west, you know, and the West Coast was probably the place it first found a home outside of New York, and of course then the South, and then of course truly global. And I know in London, for example, and Bristol and places like that in the UK, it was very early in the 80s when there was a real legit organic scene, and how important that was, you know. So it's kind of interesting, which is of course why I'm interested in asking whether you knew the brand from growing up as well. Anyway, I digress, but that's fascinating. And then the other thing you said, which is really fascinating, because this is something that resonates with me, and I find it quite hard to, I guess, communicate it. But growing up in rural England and then spending a lot of time in Bristol, London, and other cities, and then traveling around the world and living in like European cities and New York and places like that, you're always walking around and you're interacting with different people. Even if they're not that different from you, and you know, you're interacting with lots of people and you're experiencing life in a very different way. Moving over here, or shall I say out west, you know, now living in Arizona, Tucson's an old city where you actually don't have, you know, there's a lot of barrios here, and you can walk around them and you can interact with all different kinds of people. And you be in the downtown, then you can walk into the barrios, and then you can walk over into some other neighborhoods, and you don't have to drive like you would in, say, a Phoenix or a Los Angeles. But nevertheless, people tend to get in their car and then they drive to a mall to get their hair done, and then they drive to a school to pick up their kids, and then they drive back to a different mall to get dinner, and then they drive to another mall to like go to the cinema or whatever it might be. But they're always in the automobile traveling between different geographic locations. And for whatever reason, they're often like in their area or whatever, because there's these strip malls all over the city in these kind of urban, metropolitan, suburban areas. You know, maybe there's not a big African-American community there, or not a big, you know, a Latino community there. Not, you know, so perhaps people aren't interacting because they're constantly in a car moving through space to a location where they're kind of like, well, that's where their kids go. So kind of their, you know, people they grew up with or whatever else. Again, not explaining myself particularly well, but this to me fascinates me because it was a real shock to me, and I found it very difficult moving here to kind of integrate, because I'm used to integrating through interaction with different folks in different places just by the geography of the city, or the European, Latin, you know, those kinds of cities where they're old and, you know, they're built on top of each other over different times, generations, conquerors, all the rest of it. Whereas in America, a lot of it, these, you know, even in, say, a Tucson or a Los Angeles, which has obviously an old history, I think Tucson's about 700 years old. And, you know, you've got Little Barrio, and it was once belonged to Spain, once belonged to Mexico and to the US. And, you know, so it's a really interesting history. But, you know, even in these old cities, fundamentally, it just becomes a grid, and it becomes pretty much only navigable really by car. And Los Angeles, 100% that's the case. Although I know they're trying to improve a few things. But yeah, that to me is just always really kind of fascinating. And I've completely railroaded the topic. But I think the fact that you mentioned that, I think is really interesting, because that's, I think, also connected to this kind of culture around the car and around presentation, you know. So that's interesting.
That's it. People spend a lot of time in their cars because that is one of the few things that gives you that spatial freedom. Outside of look how great I look and how I'm dressed, the car is what gets people to and from. And so, you know, it's a status symbol. Look at me moving through space, especially. It's almost, you could even say, not everything that people who've experienced marginalization and oppression, and not everything is resistance, but, you know, it makes me think, not, I suppose I'm jumping over to the East Coast a bit now as well, but if you think about Will Smith's Summertime song, rolling really slowly so everybody sees you, like, look at me, look at my car, look at me moving through space, look at me taking up space. It's almost resistance when we think about the ways in which people have been confined in many respects to live in this area and go to that mall, and one of the things that I've noticed here is the spatial thinking here is different to the spatial thinking of being a Londoner, or, you know, being from the UK. It's different.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and it's it really has affected my understanding of how culture, you know, interacts and occurs here. Well, jumping back into your chapter and this idea of this new Chicano generation, do you mean by that then it's basically it's the people who are kind of in this Chicano heritage and tradition, they've kind of adopted certain bits of hip hop and then kind of, you know, kind of again made that more authentic within their own culture? How do you define this new generation, I should say? Is it a bit like a hip hop generation that's melded things together?
I would say so. I would say it becomes the ability to kind of hip hop. I mean, many different peoples and cultures or whatever, you know, get involved. And like you said, there's something about hip hop that gives people space when they come in, and they might maybe shift some of the sonic sound so it sounds a bit more familiar to, you know, whatever kind of genres of music they may listen to more, but it gives them a mouthpiece. It's a mouthpiece, and so people can begin to articulate things in ways that mean something to them, or they might even hear some of the narratives in other music and think, hey, that resonates with me. Like I might not look the same, might not be, but there's something similar here. So it does have this kind of invitation for people to come in and articulate. And if you're doing it authentically, like you said, then there's space for you in there. You know, there's space for that. So, you know, when you talk about, so in that respect, again, I always think about space. So in that respect, you're it's the mouthpiece, but you're taking up space sonically, you're taking up space visually. And, you know, you're making room to articulate brown pride, or, you know, you're asserting yourself, talking about the realities, and it becomes a way to kind of, for the new generation, for young people to kind of articulate, okay, this is who we are now. This is who we are. And, you know, it may be in another 15 years, it might still be through hip hop, it might be through something else. Different things will be happening socially for those young people to say, this is who we are now. So it just becomes a way, it kind of on top of like all of the different the cultural things, the car, the clothing, the music, it amalgamates to provide an opportunity for young people to express, this is who we are now. Yeah,
I think that's nicely encapsulated. Well, let's talk a little bit more about hip hop. The book is fantastic, and of course, the book is available for anyone who wants to check it out on intellectbooks.com. So, Tribal and the Cultural Legacy of Streetwear, which does include a wonderful chapter from Monique. So, do check that out, intellectbooks.com. But you're also involved in one of our excellent peer-reviewed journals, which I'm proud to say is Diamond Open Access, which for anyone who doesn't know means that not only is it free for anyone to read, to share, to access via a library or independently, but it also means that there's no fees associated with publishing research within the journal. Big complicated topic to discuss open access, but basically that's kind of like ironically, Diamond is the gold standard when it comes to open access, and we're really proud that we've been able to produce this journal with, again, help from the European Research Council and with a great team of editors, including yourself. So Global Hip Hop Studies, we're about, you know, it's been on the cards for 15 years or something, but you're kind of 3 volumes in, and working on more. And it really is a fantastic peer-reviewed journal. But tell me a bit about your role on that journal and what that entails.
Okay, so I'm the media reviews editor. So what that means is I'm always trying to ask people to, you know, if anybody wants to write and is interested in writing about hip hop culture, broadly speaking, is the Global Hip Hop Studies Journal, so it can be anywhere in the world. And I'm media reviews editor, so anything that's happening in the media, broadly defined, they would submit their media review article, about 1,000 words or so, which I know for some people might seem like a lot, so we can always talk and see what else can be done. But review something, I just edit it. Me and my colleague, we edit it together, and then, you know, then it goes in the journal and it's published. And it's free of charge to publish. Because publishing in journal articles can be quite expensive, so I'm very happy that I'm part of something that does not put that barrier in the way for people who want to write in academic contexts.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's an important sort of distinction there. There's lots of different kinds of open access, and if you're looking to publish your work open access, or increasingly now if your institution or someone who's funding your research or has given you some time off to do it, they'll often maybe want you to publish in an open access publication, especially if it's like a research output in, say, a journal. But that, that's a very, gray area of what that means. So you definitely want to go out there and do a bit of research into the different terms, what's green, what's gold, and what's diamond open access, and what publications are going to offer you what kind of, assistance output, and obviously to make sure that you're keeping a hold of that intellectual property rights, because there's a lot of kind of shady outfits out there as well who are masquerading as legitimate publishing houses, but they maybe don't have a peer review process, or perhaps their work isn't truly open access and internationally distributed. It's actually just something free that maybe they're making you pay to publish in, and it's just available online. But not to go too far down that path, but I think it's an important thing for anyone who's looking to publish in a project like this, that they know what open access is and what the different definitions are.
And we can confirm that we are the gold and diamond standard.
Yeah.
So if you do have anything that you do want to write, check us out.
That's right. And the great thing about Global Hip Hop Studies for me as well is it is a solid, scholarly, academic, peer-reviewed journal. But it's not only interested in scholarly voices, and the journal, a bit like Tribal, the book we were talking about, it encourages people from the culture to submit. So it's not just like the ivory tower of academics, talking about people. Again, it's authentic. We want people to, to submit their own research, even though perhaps they're not like a PhD. And there's obviously different parts of the journal, different components, different sections that allow for those different voices, without sort of trying to force them to write scholastically and to a peer review standard.
Exactly. And we work with them. We work with everyone. So yeah. So if they find something's daunting, we can work with them to help them out. So that's cool.
And I mean, of course, there's some very prominent people on the board as well. I mean, I think Trisha Rose and like producers like Ninth Wonder, who obviously are, who probably made beats for your favorite rappers, that kind of thing. So it's definitely, we're trying to integrate with hip hop on a global level as well. And as much as we really respect and love the origin story of hip hop, and having lived in New York myself, it was Mecca for me, and we're not trying to detract from that. But it's also like hip hop is so much more now. It's truly global, and I think one of the things with it is it's much more than a genre. It's a culture, and it's these different elements as well. I mean, some say 5, some say more, whatever else, and I think often it gets just conflated as a musical genre, when in fact it's so much more. And it really, it was founded as more than that, out of like kind of block parties and out of a Stop the Violence movement, and out of artistic representation across different mediums, obviously including things like graffiti and breakdancing, which is really just art and dance, art and performance, and performativity, of course, and fashion. These are all very important areas, and tapping into Tribal and that rich legacy, obviously we can see the connections there too. And of course, knowledge, I suppose, and knowledge production, consumption is really important to hip hop as a culture, and always has been, I think. And obviously the journal, some might be like, how can you have a peer-reviewed journal talking about that's rubbish, but in actuality,
production is knowledge production.
Yeah, exactly. It's right there. It's right, it's right there. And we're trying to obviously legitimize and also internationalize and make sure that these different disparate voices are heard globally, but we still want to retain that kind of authenticity and to stay true to what hip hop is. And I understand every time I say authenticity, a little bit of me dies, because it's like, it's the most laden term out there, especially when we're talking about something like hip hop. But the way I mean it, I think is like the notion of being true to yourself, and and representing you and your culture, and using like hip hop has always been like a lens for that, I think, or a way of doing it. Anyway, so if people are out there and they want to find out a bit more, want to check out what Monique's up to, do check out Global Hip Hop Studies. And again, that's totally free to access, totally free to read, share. So do check it out, intellectbooks.com. Global Hip Hop Studies, and we just really want to kind of get that out there all over the place. And one of the difficult things is trying to make sure that libraries subscribe, because they don't have to pay. Sometimes they're kind of like, oh yeah, we'll do that tomorrow, So, you know, if you're an academic affiliated with a library and you're interested in, you know, in any aspect of hip hop in its global iterations, then do go and let your library know, and they can, you know, subscribe for free.
And do it today, not tomorrow.
Exactly, no mañana. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about hip hop and its elements from a global perspective. I did want to ask you if you get a little bit frustrated, especially as a Brit, and this goes for any European or any non-US basically person. So I think like hip hop has like a hegemony around the US, and it's very centered around what's going on in the US. And to be honest, there's a lot of trash coming out of the US. Hip hop has been very much co-opted in many ways here, and there's never any light shone upon what's going on in maybe in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe broadly, and I can speak a bit about the UK, as I'm sure you can. And with the UK, it often only seems like it's grime that gets the light on it too, whereas we have a rich heritage of boom bap and a rich heritage of music connected more with our Caribbean culture, right? And that lineage, you know, around London Posse and things like that, where truly taking that London twang rather than trying to rap in an American accent and stuff. So there's a really interesting history there to be spoken about. But does that frustrate you? At the moment, all we're hearing about is J. Cole versus Kendrick Lamar versus Drake, and it's as if there's no other rappers or musicians or hip hop artists in the world who could possibly ever compete with the likes of a Cole or a Kendrick. And don't get me wrong, I think Kendrick's a genius. I think Cole's a brilliant lyricist, and Drake is a amazing pop star who has a rightful place in the pantheon of hip hop culture. But like, what about some of the people coming out of the UK or France or the Caribbean? And just for me, it kind of gets me a little bit frustrated, and especially with the Journal, I think it is trying to break down some of those barriers. But yeah, how do you feel about that?
I'm kind of not surprised. I don't know necessarily if I'm frustrated, and I'll tell you why. It's because, you know, it's the sociological hat. So like you said, you know, hip hop music and aspects of the culture have been commodified. It has been, you know, the music industry has gotten involved, and it's attached to a capitalistic structure, right? And so there's a certain amount of agencies artists may have, but ultimately the people that hold the purse strings are going to be the ones responsible for pushing particular things, right? So there's that side of things. And then we have America, which is a cultural superpower. And so it's cultural superpower, Americentric, and why would there be any need to look outside? Yeah, most other countries, given that America is the kind of cultural superpower, you know, I have an awareness of what's happening in America, an American perspective, but also have an awareness and perspective of their lived experience. So as a Londoner, as a Brit, you know, I have an awareness of the British perspective, what's going on. But because if I watch movies, if I'm watching, you know, sitcoms, if I'm listening to the most popular music, I have a sense. It might not be accurate, but I have a sense in my mind of what, you know, is happening musically, culturally in America. I have an understanding. It might not be accurate, but, you know, but from the American perspective, there's not necessarily unless someone's actively looking for it, there's not going to be a perspective understanding of the British perspective or the French perspective or anywhere else. It's just the way that it is. And so I think because of the capitalistic structure, the cultural superpower that America is, you're always going to come up against this. In the same way that if you have businesses, after a while you have a couple of, like, is it oligarchs or oligarchies? Is that the right word? I can't remember now. But you have a couple, you know, at some point, you know, or some of the other businesses get sucked up in this kind of structure, and then you've got the big businesses and everyone else. So, I mean, it's probably, I'm not frustrated because I think about it in that way, kind of a bit more philosophically. And it's kind of like, well, that sort of thing is kind of bound to happen. Not that it should happen. Other people should have room. And then we have streaming and things like that have come in, but they're also doing the same thing because they're attached to industry. So it's the same process that continues to happen. And it's only at moments of innovation, if you can figure out how to hack the system for a moment, you might get a viral moment where someone might know your hook or your chorus. Might not be the whole song, you know, but you might be able to get a moment. I don't know how we get out of that, but well, yeah.
I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and also I guess it's a bit like one of those things where people think of America as a country, but it's a continent, really. You know, and as a result of that, like, a lot of people maybe don't have a passport and don't necessarily look beyond the shores, because, you know, New York's a long way away from Louisiana. You know what I mean? So, like, there's plenty to be, you know. So that's definitely something. But I think what I've been doing is spending too much time in the comments on various social media platforms and getting frustrated by people's, you know, look beyond your own nose. There's loads of good stuff going on globally. And, like, when people are complaining, oh, why don't you talk about this? It's like, it's over there. You need to just go and have a look. But one nice little anecdote is the famous American rapper Method Man, who's from the Wu-Tang Clan, you know, a true legend of hip hop culture and a very important canonical figure within the genre, especially in rap terms. And he was on a big podcast over here, Drink Champs, which is a big, you know, hip hop podcast where they interview legends basically and get them to have a few drinks and tell a few stories. Method Man doesn't really drink anymore. He's all about the gym life. But he did share some really good stories. But one of the things I would give him props for was during this interview, multiple times he talked about how he's working with and shining a light on artists from around the world, especially from the UK. And he's done tracks with Lil Sims, who is a fantastic, you know, forward-thinking female MC from London, I believe. And, you know, just a wonderful musician doing fantastic work, regardless of what genre you're into. And then Ocean Wisdom, who's another, like, really important UK rapper who's had, like, some opportunities to break into different genres because of the kind of the sonics of his style, I suppose. But I was like, that's really interesting. But there's very few people like Method Man who are kind of using their cachet and their platform to shine a light on globally important artists. But there's definitely some options and opportunities out there. But I'd like to see some more of that. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you that question because you're one of the few people I get to talk to, say, on a podcast like this, who probably has a few of the same frustrations with me of, like, hang on a minute, there's a world outside of, you know, within there is a global world when it comes to, like, hip hop and this sort of stuff. And of course a lot of American hip hop has been exported and got us into it, but then we want to shout back a little bit as well. And it's you know, there's so much wonderful music coming out of Bristol, London, Birmingham, Manchester, various other, not only cities, but, you know, rural places too within the UK. And I know that so many other countries in Europe and beyond are doing the same thing. So just kind of trying to shine a bit of light on that. But anyway.
No, I was going to say, I think one of if we think about, I suppose, something integral to Black musical tradition is this idea of call and response, you know, so it goes out, it should come back. But again, you know, if we look at the US, and, you know, it's kind of free market economy and everything is quite self-contained. I think people like Method Man, and there might be some assumptions on my part, but, you know, they might have a certain level of economic privilege to enable them to reach outside. Absolutely. You know, if you think about the work culture here, for example, you know, many people only get 2 weeks off. If you get 2 weeks off, personal days, annual leave, depending on where you are in the world, I don't know what you call it, but 2 weeks off. 2 weeks off to go to Europe is, you know, you don't necessarily get a chance to really get in there. You know, 2 weeks to kind of, like you said, from New York to Louisiana, you can use your 2 weeks to do things internally. So there's lots of things around structurally, culturally, sociologically that help to kind of keep things contained and kind of sustain or support that Americentricity. It's only when you have maybe reached the levels or the heights of Method Man, who's actually had a chance to go and see the world as well as just touring in the US and go and all this stuff out here actually. And I now actually have maybe some time and resources to kind of begin to engage. It's only at that level where you find that, or maybe the college kid that wants to be a bit different. Like I've got a college kid that was like, oh, professor, what does bear mean? What does bear mean? It means a lot. It means a lot. You know, so some are curious because they want to be a bit edgier, a bit different. But generally, it's all like a self-contained bubble.
Yeah, that's that is a very good point. But okay, all right. Well, let me ask you.
I don't hate America. Just for the, I don't hate America.
I hope my comments haven't come across negatively either. I just think it's just interesting as that call and response and how important that is in hip hop. It surprises me how few people know about hip hop in America that's occurring elsewhere, especially when in the same breath they're complaining about it being commodified, corporatized. It's all mumble rap now. It's this, that, and the third. This is what people are saying, and I'm like, well, it's not like that in the UK. It's not like that in France. It's not like that in parts of Latin America and Africa, etc. But the other thing is, she's always funny, as like kind of a nice anecdote with this, is a lot of the musicians and people from the culture who were successful in the 90s are now equally successful in the UK and Europe. People like Jerry the Damager lives in Germany because he can play every week. You know, his pension's being paid. And it's the same, like you go to like Bristol or London in the UK and you're going to see all these greats from New York and Los Angeles playing because they're getting their pensions, you know, they're coming over and they're getting paid good money to do these tours because there's still the majority of people who listen to hip hop in those countries still listen to those kind of the quality elements. They expect lyricism, they expect maybe some thought, they expect some, you know, lyrical play, they expect good beats and all this other stuff. And for it not to be like a hip hop iteration of a pop genre. But I'm probably inflaming some people here probably with some of this, and this is not well thought out, but I think it is always interesting to kind of to talk about these kind of things. Yeah,
it's a discussion.
Well, let's talk about top fives. I know you're not one who's big on those, but are there any rappers who are definitely going to be in your kind of top five? Any MCs you particularly rate?
Well, the first ones are Salt and Pepper. They're the ones that when I saw them, I wanted to be a rapper. I wrote my first rap when I was about 7 or 8 because of that. So they're definitely up there. Love Missy Elliott. Then I suppose, you know, obvious Biggie. Who else is five? Let me think. I mean, I quite like Mos Def as well. Haven't listened to any of his more recent stuff, but you know, who else is there? Another one that I can jump on and think who I really, really enjoy. I don't know. There's lots swirling. I mean, I like Kendrick. I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, yeah. Don't get me wrong. Kendrick's wonderful, and I love like the progression of his music and his career, and like so I put him up there like as like kind of a bit of a genius, really. Like he's like like breaking down traditions and like real clever stuff.
Very much so.
And you can, depending on how you want to view an album, you can see, right, like, I see what he's doing, you know. And often it takes, like, I say that, but it takes me like maybe a year of listening before I'm like got an inclination of what he's up to.
Yeah.
And I love the way that he connected with, you know, from being from Compton and being very much in that LA tradition. And I think obviously being from TDE, but then being kind of signed by Dre, and there's some kind of connection there. So there's that real kind of like West Coast heritage. And yet he could have had a really easy path by being a bit more of a conscious version of one of those dudes, but has gone absolutely kind of left field and changed it up each album. You know, so I really respect that for sure. No. But that's a cool variety as well. And I'm glad you also shouted out a few of the female MCs, because there's a lot of great female rappers out there, both today, like Lil Sims, and then people, you know, from what my generation, let's say, of like Wildflower, Estelle, you know, Temper. And then, of course, let's not forget that back in the 80s and into the 90s, kind of before your Lil Kim, Foxy Brown, I mean, there was so many tremendous female MCs who were up there at the top of the game, whether it be Latifah, Moni Love, you know, Roxanne Shante.
Shouldn't she Moni Love originally? I'm sure.
She's from London, I think. Yeah.
And
I think she's definitely drinking vampire blood or something, because she hasn't aged. Well, no, thanks for sharing that, because I know it's also a really tough question to put people, but it's just funny for, like, you know, hip hop heads always like, my top five, you know,
I just like a bit of everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the beauty of hip hop, isn't it? As well as because of the sample-based music, and taps into those, I guess, those kind of like African and Caribbean traditions of versioning. And, you so many amazing songs that I've listened to because of hip hop. Like I was like some sample, like, oh, what is that? It's like, oh, it's Duke Ellington. All right, wicked. Wow. And that song like opens up jazz to you, and the same with like obviously with the Caribbean traditions, with reggae and dancehall music, for example, and like starting to listen to that kind of stuff as a result of hearing things in certain. So I love that about hip hop. Is a lot of people say, oh, isn't that just there's nothing original about that. Well, it's totally original, but it leads you back to these different elements that make up the songs.
Exactly. And the thing that I think that people tend to miss when it comes to this, it's almost like, so with the academic hat on, when you write an essay, if you're going to quote somebody, you're going to cite somebody, you put it in the references. And then if that person's interested, then they can go back and look at the bibliography at the back and then find that and read that original thing. So there's an element of, citation, reverence, almost like the dialoguing with the past that kind of happens with hip hop. That kind of acknowledgement to those, well, as long as they're getting paid, I guess, and get clearance, but the acknowledgement of those who have gone before. And sometimes it could be the context of that, what that original song was used in, how that's applied in this to kind of bring that meaning forward, or put a new spin on that meaning, or just a nod because they might like that particular artist. It's more than just I'm copying. There's a creativity and a compositional production element that is, and an ear that is very much important in that kind of artistry of it all. It's not just a simple copy and paste. There's especially if it's really considered with care, it's like the ultimate essay, which I suppose a lot of people might not think is great, but obviously as an academic I do.
I love this. So you're basically saying that all scholars are effectively hip hop, and I think that's.
Well, I'm claiming it.
I like that. You know what? I've never thought about referencing and rap in the same kind of like sentence like that. But yeah, you're dead right, aren't you? It's like writing in a journal and producing a hip hop song. There's actually a lot of similar traits going on there, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. Now there's an article in that for someone who wants to write something for global hip hop studies, but that's for another day. But I do have a few more questions for you, Monique. I'd like to get a little bit of a quick time round now. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. There might be a couple tricky ones in there, but it's coming off the top of your head. What do you think about these? So the first one I wanted to ask you, you've obviously lived in a few different places, but do you have any favorite cities, and why?
Favorite cities. Well, I love DC.
Okay.
I love Washington DC.
That's interesting.
Been there a couple of times. Really, really like it. And sometimes I miss home. Not the weather, but sometimes I miss London.
Yeah, I too. I miss Bristol a great deal. But now I'm living in Arizona. I got to say, it's very. I love going home for a while. Yeah. It's really hard to ever envision living. Back in a wet UK climate.
It's not for me.
Just trying to get a bit more hate from the audience today. Between so we've kind of dissed Kendrick Lamar. No, I'm just and now I'm talking about the weather. But okay, that's cool. What is it about DC that you like so much?
I don't even know if I can put my finger on it. So when I first went there, I just liked the vibe. I liked not that necessarily that I like to dress very casually. It's quite professional in that respect, but I like the ways in which it kind of reminded me of home, but was a bit different. And I also think the time of year I went, I think it was like October or November, it was still warm, and I'm like, what is this? There's that as well. So you got the subway, you can still kind of get around. I like the architecture as well. I find it quite interesting here because I'm in near the old town, so they've got the old buildings, and they talk about the old buildings. Like, yeah, this was built in 1900, and I'm like,
yeah, right, mate.
in the UK, 500 years is what that's all. So some older architecture there as well, and it's walkable. And I do miss the walkability of cities, living out here as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't quite put my finger on it, but yeah, the food, the culture, just the vibe, I like it.
Well, let's talk about food then. So you're a busy writer and you're having a blood sugar meltdown. What's your go-to snack?
My go-to snack is, if it's not going to be a protein shake because I'm bodybuilding, it is my undercover chocolate. Is it called dark chocolate and sea salt? So it's kind of healthy. The fats are okay. The carbs are okay. It still kind of fits in with the bodybuilding lifestyle.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, a little dark chocolate here and there. I think that's definitely on the good list.
Yeah.
Okay, that's and that'll definitely resolve any writer's block, I think. So
yeah.
We've talked a fair bit about music, and I mean hip hop, but many genres. One of the things that I think we've kind of lost a little bit, but I love some good album artwork. And are there any album covers or any artwork from any particular albums, whatever genre, that you particularly love, or that inspire you, or that stick with you?
That is a very good question, because I think nowadays, because everything music is no longer tangible. You know, you'd go to the store, you'd flick through the records, you'd flick through the CDs. Yes, CDs were a thing, young listeners, or even cassettes. Yeah. You know, you'd look at it and you'd look at the liner notes and you don't really get to do that. And I don't really even think about it anymore. I don't know. There's nothing that really jumps
the
off.
other thing is when we were younger, like, you know, CDs were quite expensive as well.
Yeah.
So you know, if you actually bought one, and like if I bought like a you know, often there was a bit of a scam as well, where like say like a genre like hip hop, or they have it on import, so it'd be like £18 or something, and like back in like the 90s, and I'm like, all right, so I've got to like do triple paper round or whatever, you know, and then so when you get that tangible,
it was like,
it's like hallowed, right? And then the liner notes and the booklet, you know, you'd pour over that because you can't afford another one, you know.
Exactly, you can't afford another one. Exactly. Yeah, they won't even think of one at the moment that really stands out, and maybe because it was so long ago. Like, I'll have a think about that.
Yeah, well, that's maybe I'll ask you that in a forthcoming podcast. It's been interesting for me because I've actually I went to a few exhibitions not too long ago. There's one called Contact High, which is about which was Fab Five Freddy, I think, did the curation for, but it's like all about hip hop and photography, and a lot of those, you know, iconic album covers, you don't realize who the photographers were, and it's actually they've done all these collections around their work. And we obviously talk about tribal, so maybe Esteban Oriol obviously is a very prominent photographer who's mentioned in the book, and like has been responsible for more about, like, I suppose, curating Chicano culture and LA culture rather than like so much hip hop and album covers. But like there's a load of them though, and like to tell the story behind the cover. That's kind of interesting. So I've been if anyone's interested, check out Contact High. That's a really cool exhibition that's been doing the rounds, and there's a lot of really good material online. So are you currently reading anything? Is there any books on the mantelpiece?
Are there any books on the mantelpiece? There are too many books on the mantelpiece and not enough eyes or time to read them.
I get you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of books. So at the moment, I've just finished reading a book on, bookshelf, on Black storytelling. I just finished reading this one, which is Recovering Black Storytelling in Qualitative Research. Because as a methodologist, I want to find out, you know, innovations in, you know, research methods and methodological approaches, that kind of thing. I managed to get my hands on a book by Ewan Spencer, a non-academic book on UKG. It's an old book. It cost quite a bit of money, but it's a photography book, and you know, I wanted to capture, you know, what was what was happening at the time. He was going out, and you and Spencer was capturing what was happening at various raves and things like that. So I've been very much into trying to, it's funny speaking about photography, various books that kind of capture what's happening in various subcultures at the time. So there was a recent one, not quite a photo book. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but I think it's We Say Reload or something, looking at drum and bass culture. Yes. So I've been trying to get some more kind of coffee table style books of the subcultures, because I teach Black music and African diaspora to the students here where I'm at my university, and I want them to, because I can tell them, oh yeah, jungle was like this, or various things, and they're like, okay, they have, they weren't even alive at the time, so it's just like, want to show them this is what people were wearing, or this is what the kind of atmosphere was like, to try and give them something. So I've been slowly collecting some of those kinds of books.
That's really interesting. It's a funny thing, arguably the funniest thing about getting old is when like you start talking to people and they just don't have any clue about the references you're chatting about, and you're like, all right, you don't know Thundercats and you don't know Jungle. All right.
Exactly. The eyes glaze over.
What are we going to talk about?
They nod and they start stepping away slowly. It's like, no, don't leave.
No, those kinds of books are really really cool. And not to plug another intellect book, but one of my favorite books we ever did was called Somewhere Leather, Somewhere Lace, which looks at like new romantic, punk, post-punk.
Okay.
It's all photography, but it's all about that subculture, specifically in New York and I think in London. Really groovy stuff. So I'd recommend people check that one out too. But I do love those kind of like photographic, time capsules almost of like specific subcultures, like you say, rave scene, jungle, the free parties out in the forest, that kind of thing. Really cool books out on that. So that's a cool one. All right, we're coming to the end, but I do have a couple more questions to ask. So there's going to be the Monique Charles biopic. Who is playing you?
Okay, this is, I have no idea. A trick question. I mean, when the actor or actress reaches this age, I have no idea. When I was younger, people used to say that Moesha would remind them of me. We're both tall. For the longest time, I'm back in braids. I used to have braids when I was younger as well, or plaits, as we would say in the UK. But other than that, I don't know if there's any. I can't even think of an age mate kind of actress that would play.
I don't think you need to be don't think you need to worry about that. I've had people on here who have like said that people 30, 40 years they're junior or already dead. So like, but no, I get it. So like Brandy, Moesha, that makes sense. I get that. All right. Well, then finally for me, what are you working on now? What's the next hot topic?
Well, some of the things I work on are top secret, because if I tell you, or if I tell anyone that's listening, I have to, dispose of them. But there's a few things. So I'm a methodologist, so I'm working on different kinds of methodological innovation. I don't want to talk about that too much. And as always, I mean, I'm the sort of person that does lots of different things. So I'm a sound therapist, I'm a cardiologist, I'm a bodybuilder, all this. So I'm working on lots of different things, but I'm always looking for ways to incorporate some of my interests outside in. So if I can incorporate elements of sound in the stuff that I'm doing, but then I do music and sound anyway, is my in my sociological capacity anyway. If I can bring that in, if I can bring in anything to do with energy or play with kind of research methods like autoethnography and things like that, I'm kind of bouncing ideas around at the moment. So yes, I'm going to leave it at that, because
watch this space, basically.
Yes, watch this space, because I like to keep my things top secret.
Well, on that note, Monique, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful having you as a guest on In Conversation, and it's been a really wonderful, slightly rambling conversation. That's my bad, but I've actually really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's been nice. Been nice not to be stuck to too many topics and to float about all over the place. And and thank you so much for your contributions. I think the Tribal book is fantastic, and the work that you're doing in Global Hip Hop Studies too. And I'd urge everyone to take a look at that, especially Global Hip Hop Studies. It's totally free. It's a really important resource. So I just urge everyone to to check it out, to share it with people who might be interested. And yeah, it really is a wonderful journal.
Just one thing to add on to the Global Hip Hop Studies Journal, because I know you mentioned, you know, lots of people, we do know the Nexus story. We think about the, you know, we think about that kind of, but think about it, the listeners and people that are interested in writing, think about it as, or the Global Hip Hop Studies as, we are tracking elements of its legacy. So you want to be part of, you know, bringing the legacy into form, but something that people can look at, so they can actually say, oh, okay, it's doing this in India, it's doing this in South Africa, it's doing it in Brazil. So you can, you know, we're tracking the legacy and making sure that those voices, the influence of the Nexus can be tracked and seen where it is elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a very much a fair assessment. That's a nice way of thinking about it. Okay. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and I will definitely have you back on because there's lots more to discuss.
Yeah, definitely. All right, take care.
Bye-bye.